Thanksgiving's coming up, and we're going to have a slowdown. That TSA is a pain in the neck. We've got a story about a man who was humiliated. Those people are doing nasty things to folks, and I just think it's time they quit.
All in the name of security. Well, they are trying to compromise some of those pat-downs at the airport, but with Americans flying all over the country this week for Thanksgiving, the changes that are being made will not come soon enough. Here's John Jessup.
They sound like horror stories. Tales of passengers going through airport security and dealing with new procedures that at best can only be described as too close and personal.
She put her full hand on my breast and said, "What is this?" And I said, "It's a prosthesis because I've had breast cancer." And she goes, "Well, you'll need to show me that."
This man, a bladder cancer survivor, says he was humiliated when the seal between his urostomy bag and his stomach was broken during a full-body pat-down, and he ended up drenched in his own liquid waste.
Here I am in this room with no windows. I've got urine, two men I don't know. My underwear had been dropped to the floor. I'm standing in front of them with my underwear and had to ask to pull it up. I was so embarrassed and so petrified of going out into the airport thinking people would see me and quote-unquote smell me.
The implementation of the TSA's ramped-up security measures has drawn widespread complaints that the procedure is too invasive.
I think the TSA is out of control.
After first taking a hard stance, declaring the new measures are here to stay, the head of the TSA issued a statement Sunday saying, "We will work to make the screening procedures as minimally invasive as possible while still providing the security that the American people want and deserve." Pistol says trying to strike that balance is not easy.
Clearly, it's invasive. It's not comfortable. It really comes down to what is that balance between privacy and security.
Somewhere around 25 million people will travel by air this week for Thanksgiving. A number of them will see the TSA's new ramped-up security measures for the first time. And many have already thought about whether they'll choose the full body scan versus the physical pat-down.
Now I'd rather do the full body scan than having somebody handling me.
They'll never see me again, so oh well.
As for the minimally invasive changes, no word on how soon they'll come, but for many passengers, they can't come soon enough. John Jessup, CBN News, Washington.
And the amazing thing is, people who are terrorists, where did they get those bombs? They got them overseas. They got them in Yemen. Or they got them in Jordan, or they got them in some other country like Pakistan. They didn't get them here in America. It wasn't Americans flying from one place to another. It was somebody coming into America with a shoe bomb and with that stuff in his underwear. I mean, but the Israelis know how to do it. They profile people. They know who logical terrorists are. They've got them tracked, and they can figure out, all right, these are the ones you screen, but everybody else goes on through. This thing is crazy. Bureaucracy out of control, and I just think it's awful, and it's time the government do something about it. Well, Lee, I'm sure you can fix it. Tell us what's next.
Well, Pat, in other news, how big of a role did religious values play in this past election? And will they matter in the next presidential race? Some of the nation's leading religious and political scholars gathered in Washington to talk about that, and Paul Strand was there.
Most of these scholars don't think religious issues played a big role in this election.
They didn't get a lot of traction in 2010.
But for others, the feeling's different. Religious issues loom large.
For the younger evangelicals, abortion remains a fundamental issue. They're every bit as pro-life as their parents. They're not quite as sure about some of the gay rights issues, but they're more willing to consider the environment. They're more willing to consider poverty or hunger.
And religious values will continue to influence voters.
In fact, it seems like every election year, religion plays a bigger part. And that's because of the engagement of evangelicals and conservative Catholics.
And it's not that Republicans have a lock on religious voters, but that Democrats have such a rough time talking faith talk.
They don't do it. They don't know how to do it. They're not altogether comfortable doing it.
Why is it that Democrats seem incapable of closing the quote-unquote God gap?
Professor Olson says the numbers are growing among voters who feel the Democrats are unfavorable to religion, and President Obama sometimes personifies the problem.
People aren't sure what he's up to religiously, and don't sort of trust that he's Christian.
She says if his popularity continues to slide till 2012,
no matter who the Republican nominee is, folks will come out to vote against Obama.
But American religious believers have wildly divergent views, so are hard to completely figure out.
Among those who think the Christian Bible is literally true, word for word, A surprising number also believe in reincarnation.
So these scholars say the best thing a candidate can do is just be upfront about their religious beliefs and make sure they have them.
The worst thing that one could be for the American electorate is an atheist.
Paul Strand, CBN News, Washington.
Pat, do you think that the gap is widening between the religious and the secular in terms of politics?
Well, the last time the voting for the Tea Party was based primarily on out-of-control spending, although a good half of the Tea Party people were evangelicals. I was privileged to start the Christian Coalition, and we brought a lot of people into the political process. They're still there, and the numbers are growing dramatically. And they have really been denied a seat at the table and a voice in policy. They're brought into the polls, and after the polls are over, they're told to go back to their churches and keep their mouths shut. Well, now they're not doing that any longer, and the Tea Party has been very successful. But is the gap growing? Probably, and as was said, for some reason, the Democrats, who have many black people on board and who are very religious people, somehow the leadership isn't able to close the gap. The reason is they don't believe it. Lee?
Pat, British Muslim students are being taught Sharia law. According to the BBC, the Sharia classes are taught over the weekend. They use Saudi Arabian textbooks, which ask children to list the reprehensible qualities of Jews and teach that Jews were transformed into pigs and apes. The books also teach that homosexuals should be executed and show students the correct way to chop off the hands and feet of thieves. Britain's education secretary says it will tighten regulations on these part-time classes and that anti-Semitic and homophobic sentiments have, quote, absolutely no place in English education or in public life in Britain. Pat?
It gets curiouser and curiouser over in the UK. You wonder how they let something like this get through to begin with. Can you imagine a school in America? Because we have schools in America, Northern Virginia, teaching that very same thing. Where do they get the textbooks? They're from Saudi Arabia. Who writes them? The Wahhabis, the ultra-Orthodox Muslims. And it's that brand of Islam that's being exported by the enormously rich Saudis throughout the world. And they want to convert people, and if they could indoctrinate little children that the Jews are the results of apes and pigs or transformed into it's shocking that they would allow that to be taught in the schools. But they do. So they say, well, that doesn't have a place in British education. Well, when are they going to stop it? Lee?
North Korea has set off alarms in Washington with revelations of a new uranium enrichment facility. Stanford University professors visited the secretive nation, where they were shown a, quote, ultra-modern control room operating hundreds and hundreds of centrifuges. This follows reports last week of another new North Korean facility, a light water reactor. U.S. nuclear envoy Stephen Bosworth has been dispatched to the region. North Korea has made these nuclear advances despite being hit with several rounds of sanctions since it first tested a nuclear device in 2006. Well, don't look for the U.S. economy to get better anytime soon. The National Association of Business Economists forecast that growth will come in at 2.6% in 2011. That's basically the same as the 2.7% the group expects for this year, but some analysts believe the economy could be stronger next year. Barron's Magazine points out that consumers have paid off some of their debt and will start shopping again, and that could lead to economic growth as high as 4% next year. Pat, do you agree?
I doubt it. I really do, although consumers are beginning to think, let's save a little bit now. But, I mean, they've reduced, like $5.5 trillion down to $4.5 trillion or whatever it is. I mean, they've cut $1 trillion in and we say, yippee, but they're still wallowing in debt. So the smart ones are going to say, let's keep the belt tight and... Well,
Washington seems to feel like if they just say that the good thing is happening, that we're all going to buy that. But I do think people have a sense that the whole economic picture is still very unsettled.
Well, it has to do with employment. If people haven't got jobs, they're not going to spend money regardless. And it's the jobs that are important.
The pastor who warned his members that Facebook could lead to infidelity has offered to step down from his position. That after he admitted being involved in a three-way sexual relationship with his wife and a male church assistant. Pastor Cedric Miller gave court testimony 7 years ago that his wife had an affair with a church assistant. Miller said he took part in many of the sexual encounters. In his sermon Sunday, he apologized to his church for what he called a foolish transgression from his past. But he stands by his statements that Facebook could lead to problems in marriages. 25 million Indian people live outside the nation of India. They're called the South Asian Diaspora, and CBN World Reach has launched a new website aimed at reaching them with the gospel. TipriTV.com hosts the largest collection of Christian programming in the various Indian languages. The website features original World Reach programs with content from the 700 Club. Influential Indian writers also blog about current events in South Asia. Viewers can even talk with counselors through chat software called Live Response. One viewer writes, "I never expected that God can speak to me through this medium. Praise God. It is heart-touching. God bless the counselors' patience and this organization." You can find out more about CBN World Reach by logging on to cbn.com/worldreach.